Good morning, everybody. Welcome to day 2. Thanks for joining me here for the opening remarks. What I'd like to do in the few minutes I have with you this morning is actually introduce you a little bit for those of you who aren't that closely connected to the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine, to what it is ARM does and how it is we work to try to advance the whole sector, both here in Europe and in the United States. So we describe ARM as the global voice of this sector. We have the privilege of doing that, in part because we have a very robust membership. 425 different organizations are members of ARM, and those organizations are diverse. Primarily, we represent commercial companies, both small and large therapeutic developers, but we also have tool and technology providers, service providers, and a significant number of nonprofits. And those are both research institutions and patient advocacy groups. And it gives us a little bit of a perspective on this sector that I think is a little bit different than some other organizations, and also gives us a different kind of credibility when we engage with policymakers. We're really focused on trying to do 4 main things, and these have been consistent over a number of years. First, we really are trying to advocate for favorable legislation when either the US Congress or legislators here in Europe are contemplating changes of any variety. We're there to think about what would the impact on the cell and gene therapy sector be, and is there an opportunity for us to work with lawmakers to create a more conducive environment to the successful commercialization of safe and effective cell and gene therapies. We also work with regulators around the world to try to create sensible and predictable regulatory pathways for advanced therapies. We've worked quite a lot over these last few years, as you heard a bit about yesterday, and you'll hear more about, to try to create and enable innovative payment models and effective reimbursement for these therapies, which, as you know, are different in kind and in type and in payment structure than traditional pharmaceuticals. We also have done a lot of work, and I'll speak to this a little bit more, in trying to address the manufacturing challenges that are unique to our sector. So ARM has grown pretty rapidly. We're only 12 years old. We were founded by a couple of individuals who recognized that the traditional large biotech association, at least in the United States, didn't really understand or attend to the particular needs of cell and gene therapy. We've enjoyed, as the sector has grown, a rapid period of growth, and it's, as I said, has enabled us to really be credible when we reflect that we're the global voice of the sector. This I mentioned a little bit earlier, the diversity of our membership. As you can see, most of the membership is small corporations of fewer than 100 people, fewer than $50 million in revenue, many, of course, with no revenue at all. Some number of large corporations, as large biotech and large pharma has become more interested in the cell and gene therapy space and more deeply invested. They've also become more deeply invested in ARM. I won't go through every slice of the pie, but you can see here this diversity of the ARM membership. We've gone through sort of some transitions at ARM. I would say that in the early years, the work was really focused on convening the sector, finding key leaders in the early days and bringing them together to both network, of course, but also to really define what are the important issues facing the sector that could be better addressed collectively as opposed to leaving it to each individual company to try to address. Then I think we moved into a period of growth and maturation. That's when I came on board as ARM's first CEO. We tried to create sort of the infrastructure, knowing that we had arrived at a sufficient size that we could really mature the organization. And then for the last 2 years, we've really tried to emphasize improving our advocacy clout. So we've added a number of people onto our teams, both in Europe and in the United States, to strengthen our effectiveness in working with policymakers. Our public affairs priorities are numerous, but just to flag a few of them, we're really focused on educating policymakers in Brussels. If you heard my remarks yesterday, we feel that the data ARM collects is a bit of a yellow flag for Europe, that there are some warning signs about Europe's competitiveness globally in the ATMP space. And we want to make sure that European policymakers understand that data, that there's such a strong foundation to build on here, but there are definitely some yellow flags. Then we work to kind of explain what is it that could be done to improve the landscape for ATMP company formation and in delivering products all the way to patients, which is of course the goal. And we do that in conversations in Brussels, in France, in Germany, and in the UK. One of the big opportunities for us, I think, is the rewrite of the European pharma legislation, which is happening presently, hasn't happened in 2 decades, and is both a risk for the sector and an opportunity for us. On the US side, we're also strengthening our relationships with members of Congress and other key decision makers at the federal level, and we're working very hard to advance something called PDUFA, which is the user fee agreement, the 7th user fee agreement. This year's agreement between pharmaceutical companies and fee-paying entities and the US FDA includes a very, very significant increase in the number of people that will be dedicated, the number of FTEs dedicated to CBER, the part of the FDA that oversees cell and gene therapy. That division includes both cell and gene therapy, which of course has seen a very steep rise in submissions to the agency, and also covers vaccines. So that team has been very heavily subscribed in terms of dealing with the COVID pandemic, and it's been a very challenging couple of years for that team. Really, that team can only serve our sector effectively with more resources and more people. So this agreement and the legislation that actually puts it into practice is very, very important for our future in the US. We also are working to remove barriers to innovative payment models in the US. In the US, there's a series of rather kind of complex bits of regulatory underbrush, if you will, that weren't designed for cell and gene therapy, either to advantage it or disadvantage it, but has the effect of making it very difficult for companies to enter into pay-per-performance kind of arrangements without running afoul of certain provisions like best price and anti-kickback and things like that, which seem to be implicated in situations where you might have some sort of rebate if a therapy doesn't work or a reduced payment. So it's not that people don't favor the implementation of these pay-for-performance kind of models. In fact, policymakers and others are pretty encouraged by our sector's willingness to enter into those kind of arrangements, but the historical legacy healthcare system needs updating to allow it. Lastly, I would say we are working as an ARM team to try to raise the profile of our sector, not just in the trade press, but also in the everyday media, in the lay media, both as a way of giving you all a bit of air cover and support in your own public efforts, but also to try to create a bit of an ecosystem that supports our public affairs advocacy work. Oops, sorry. Another key priority for us, because we hear this from our members so often, and obviously we have seen a number of hiccups in the field that link to CMC challenges, particularly regulatory challenges in the United States around CMC requirements. So ARM has been very focused on trying to help the sector as a whole address those challenges, both by working with regulators to just improve the clarity and consistency of the application of CMC regulatory requirements and to evolve them in a way that makes sense. So one of the things we do is convene workshops on certain specific topics. We did one recently on PSCs, because we feel that that's an area, for example, where the science is moving very fast, but the sort of CMC regulatory requirements around that space weren't particularly working well, and we felt it was an opportunity to educate the US FDA a bit about the state of the field and what's needed. We are working to increase both the quality and the cadence of our interaction with, again, particularly the US FDA, because that's the key pain point, through a couple of different strategies, and hopefully we'll have more to announce about that a little bit later this year. And then, as we mentioned, we're trying to get this PDUFA agreement approved legislatively, in addition to the provision that will add a number of additional personnel to the relevant part of the FDA. There are also some provisions in there to create a CMC pilot, and we are trying to leverage that to make sure that ATMPs are a big part of that CMC pilot, and that we influence sort of the parameters of that pilot so that it's effective for our community. In addition, on the manufacturing front, Mike Lemke and his team at ARM have spent a couple of years in sort of deep concert with a whole variety of our member organizations to create some manufacturing best practice guides, if you will, that are focused on how one would apply quality by design principles to, first, the manufacture of an AAV gene therapy. That's a project we call A-Gene. And secondarily, to an autologous cell therapy. That's a project we call A-Cell. A-Gene was completed and published last year and has been rolled out in a series of webinars with the member experts who helped us craft each of the chapters. And it's now being pretty widely used as a workforce development tool. So it may be helpful to you as you bring new people into the field and kind of train them up on kind of this particulars of manufacturing in this space. The same is true for A-Cell. It's just a little bit behind in time, and we're looking to publish A-Cell just a bit later this year. Each of these are free tools that are available both to ARM members and to ARM and non-ARM members. And if you're interested in checking them out, feel free to talk to Mike, but also you can just download them from the ARM website. As I mentioned, it's a broad group of contributors who participated in this, and we worked with our friends at NIMBLE, the standards coordinating body, standards coordinating, yes, I guess that's right, and USP to put it together. Here's just a couple of examples of past work of ARM, again, to just give you a flavor for how it is we're trying to help the sector as a whole. ARM was really centrally responsible for the creation of the RMAT designation as a particular pathway for regenerative medicines in the United States. We were the central player in eliminating a duplicative regulatory requirement in the United States for gene therapy trials called the NIH RAC process. We helped develop a CAR-T-DRG, which is a special reimbursement formula that improved the reimbursement for CAR-T therapies. Also in the United States, we have worked closely to create a new rule for Medicaid that allows for these innovative payment models. And we recently worked with our colleagues in Germany to eliminate a sort of bureaucratic barrier that had made it more difficult to actually make cell and gene therapies available in German hospitals. I mentioned that we're trying to raise the profile of the whole sector in kind of a broader swath of media. Here's just a couple of examples where we've been able to talk about what's special about this sector, both in AP, in NPR, and then as well as trade press that you're probably all quite familiar with. We just published a report on summarizing a number of bits of data about the sector over the course of 2021. I mentioned some of these data points yesterday in my opening remarks. Here you see some other kind of key data points. This is a service ARM provides to the community, is trying to really have a well-curated data set that helps us track what are the trends in the sector. I think they had put out a bunch of copies of this report yesterday. There's a number floating around. It's also available digitally for your use. And we do this, we welcome you taking, slides from these reports we do and integrating them into your own work as they're useful, as well as just using them to enhance your own understanding of the sector. There are other resources available to you from us. In addition to the annual report, we do other kinds of specialty reports related to the economic impact of certain kinds of therapies on the healthcare system. We also do some regular reports that you might find useful. We do an update every month on ARM activity that goes to our members called the Voice of the Sector. And then we have thousands of people subscribe to a weekly newsletter that is just an update on developments in the sector from business, clinical, policy, personnel. It's available to you for free. You just sign up at the website, and it's kind of an easy one-stop shop for sector information. I won't go into this in detail, but the way that people tend to get the most out of ARM, if you are an ARM member, is by engaging with us in various committees. And we have committees focused on regulatory affairs and reimbursement matters and government relations and science and technology. And so if you're interested in learning more about that, the ARM team here would be happy to kind of help you get the most out of being an ARM member. And then lastly, we have a whole series of events. This is one of a number of events that ARM holds. This is our main event in Europe, held every April here. We have a kind of counterpart in the United States called the Meeting on the Mesa that's held every October in Southern California. We do a State of the Industry brief at JP Morgan every year and look forward to being able to do that in person again, hopefully soon. We bring folks together for a congressional fly-in. For those of you who have a U.S. Presence or folks in the United States, we'd love to have members of your team join us in Washington on June 7th and 8th, where we kind of allow people to meet each other, which is always nice, but also to tell the story of the sector to you members of Congress and their staff. And then lastly, we hold a series of webinars on topics that are of interest to the sector. So we encourage you, if you would like to get more involved with us, if you're already a member, and if you're not a member, might be interested in understanding. If you'd like to be a part of this effort collectively, I mean, you can, I think, hope you hear from us and can understand. We feel like there is unbelievable opportunity in this sector, but there are also a number of pretty important challenges standing between where we are today and where we want to be that are best addressed by us working together to tackle them. So if you'd like to be a part of that and aren't already, please reach out to us and we'd be happy to teach you more.